Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. After the 5,000 had eaten and were satisfied, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and precede him to the other side toward Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And when he had taken leave of them, he went off to the mountain to pray. When it was evening, the boat was far out on the sea, and he was alone on the shore. Then he saw that they were tossed about while rowing, for the wind was against them. About the 4th watch of the night, he came toward them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. They had all seen him and were terrified, but at once he spoke with them. "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." He got into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely astounded. They had not understood the incident of the loaves. On the contrary, their hearts were hardened. The Gospel.
Did it ever happen to you where you wanted to say to God, "It's a fine situation you put me in"? Maybe that never happens to you. And if you've ever felt like that, you're in good company with the prophet Jeremiah, who said, "Lord, you duped me, and I let myself be duped." And so here we have the disciples. They get into a boat. But if you look at this passage carefully, Jesus put them in the boat. He sent them out. He knew what was coming. He pushed them right into a storm with intent. And you see, we cheat and go to the end of the passage because they were afraid. They didn't understand because fear was obscuring their vision. And so Jesus goes off to the mountain to pray. He sort of begins to take on the image that the disciples miss of Moses going to the mountain, the closeness with God. The throne stands firm from of old. This is where he goes, the Psalms say. And so, like the manifestations on Sinai that Moses encountered, Jesus goes as the living God to be on top of the mountain where Moses met God himself. And not only that, but you see how water conquers things with the people of Israel, and how God used water to take away all their enemies. And here in this passage, the enemy is fear. And the water is under the control of God himself. Tremble, O earth, before the Lord, the God of Jacob, who turned rocks into pools of water and flint into flowing springs. Jesus is the Lord of all. And from the mountaintop, he's directing everything. Then he looks out and he sees them tossed about on the waves while rowing. And here there seems to be a pause. Afterwards, the scripture says he saw they were tossed about on the waves, and then it says he came walking to them on the water. And between the verses there seems to be this pause, like he saw them on the waves. Yeah, okay. How you guys doing? And he waits. And it's not until the 4th watch of the night that he begins to walk, the time of the darkest hour. The time when the apostles would go into the boat with vigor to get across the lake, and probably by now, in the midst of the tossing of the waves, they're in the midst of, pun intended, deep despair. They're not seeing a way out of this. And then you could say it's the time of Psalm 130, out of the depths I cry out to you, O God. And so Jesus goes walking on the sea. You can hear in the background Mark musing over Job chapter 9. He walked the stretches out. He walked along and stretched out his hands and treads upon the waters of the sea. And we're told then, in the next verse, he intends to pass them by. Now, that doesn't mean he wanted to walk past them. There's something else. It's a reference to the book of Exodus. When God wanted to reveal himself to Moses, he would hide him in a cleft of a rock, and he would pass by because Moses couldn't look at him directly. He wanted to fix it so that Moses wouldn't have to look at him because he wouldn't bear the sight in his humanity. And so he would pass by Moses and let Moses see his back. And Jesus intended to pass them by so that he could reveal himself to them to a point. And then it says they saw him and they were terrified, exactly what would happen with Moses. There was a type of terror and fear in him to see God in all his awe. Jesus then says, take courage. Now the translation here says, it is I, do not be afraid. But if you do some digging around, it really reads, take courage, I am. Does anybody remember where that verse, those two words come from? It comes from the book of Exodus, when God from the burning bush reveals himself to Moses and declares who he is. Take courage, I am. Do not be afraid. In a sense now, the disciples in the boat are seeing Jesus on the water, and they're really seeing him. They see much more than Moses could ever imagine, because they are really seeing God in Jesus Christ. And so they were close to him. He gets into the boat with them. But it says they did not understand. Their hearts were hardened. It is fear that's binding their hearts and keeping them from seeing. And St. John tells us it's perfect love that casts out all fear. And now Jesus is in the boat with them to demonstrate to them that for the next couple of years, he and the disciples are going to become so close. There's going to be love between them. The love that casts out all fear. And after the resurrection, they're going to begin to really understand what that means. But for right now, they really don't see it. But he has brought them into the eye of a terrible storm and got them through it. It's a kind of a preview of what's coming. The storms will come, he's saying to his disciples. They will come as surely as the snow comes down on a Wednesday morning, or the rains come down in a violent storm with thunder and lightning. The storms will come, but if you're in the boat with Jesus, there's nothing to fear. And that boat for us today would be the church, where we encounter Jesus in the boat, personally in the sacraments, in his word, and especially in the Holy Eucharist. Jesus makes himself personally present. And from the view of the cross, we see how much he loves us. And when the tempests come, we trust in his love and his mercy. This is the schooling Jesus was desiring to give to his disciples in this little trip on the sea that he sends them to with intent to change their hardened hearts to the soft hearts that are so in love with Christ that they trust him and realize that in the midst of a storm, a violent storm, the safest place is with Jesus even if it's in a little fragile boat like the church.
Regina Celi, letare